I'm a southern skeptic, I won't fall for every tale, seeking out the logic in a world where legends pale. I'm a southern skeptic, truth is what I'm digging for. In a land of stories I keep searching for much more.
What's going on, y'all? Southern Skeptic here. So today I want to talk about Answers in Genesis. They recently put out a video about feathered dinosaurs, and I haven't seen a lot of people respond to it yet, but they make a claim in this video that I think is going to kind of blow everybody's minds.
Or a bird. Looks like a dinosaur. How about this one? That looks like a bird. There's just one problem. That's the same skeleton. Same bones, just posed differently. Dinosaurs and birds are very different. We're going to talk about 7 major differences between dinosaurs and birds today.
This is my favorite part, because they're saying that the only difference between birds and dinosaurs is their posture. Like, that's it. So a little bit of background first. For the past 30, 40 years, creationists have been saying that there are no feathered dinosaurs, that birds didn't evolve from dinosaurs, that birds aren't dinosaurs, right? They have said that Archaeopteryx is not a transition between, non-avian dinosaurs and birds, that it itself is just a bird. And the problem with that is the fact that it ignores all of the similarities between theropod dinosaurs that aren't found in modern birds, but are found between theropods and Archaeopteryx. So it was predicted that more feathered dinosaurs would be found, and of course they were found in the early 90s, in the late 90s, and early 2000s, and mid-2010s, mostly in the Liang province of China. They have found several feathered dinosaur fossils. So how have young Earth creationists responded to this? Well, of course, they just did what they did with Archaeopteryx. Any fossil that had unambiguous evidence of pennaceous feathers, they just classified as a bird. The problem with this is that many of these feathered animals are clearly dinosaurs. They're clearly theropod dinosaurs. They have traits that are only found in theropod dinosaurs and not found in modern birds. But because they have feathers, Answers in Genesis and other creationist organizations have labeled them as birds. So what this has done is all of these traits that are only found usually in theropod dinosaurs and not birds are now traits that belong to birds, since they have classified these as birds. So in an attempt to distinguish birds from dinosaurs, they have instead blurred the line between what a dinosaur and a bird actually is. And so they're going against their whole point of labeling anything with feathers as a bird. You see, the reason they're harping on feathers so much is because it's such a clear distinguishing trait that separates reptiles from, birds. And since birds are the only animals today that have feathers, they want to say that anything with feathers is a bird. That way there's this clear line of separation between reptiles and birds, so that there's no indication that, maybe birds are actually just descendants of feathered reptiles, right? In this case, dinosaurs. So in an effort to undermine that, they say that any dinosaur with feathers is actually a bird. But again, all they have done is make it so that these theropod traits found in like dromaeosaurs and other maniraptoran dinosaurs, now these are traits of birds. So now what is the difference between a dinosaur and a bird? Because from a anatomical standpoint, there's not much difference between a feathered non-avian dinosaur and a non-avian dinosaur that doesn't have feathers. So now they, instead of, distinguishing even more between dinosaurs and birds, they've actually made it harder to distinguish between dinosaurs and birds. Because now if they're going to say that dromaeosaurs are actually birds, well, then why aren't compsognathids birds? Or why aren't, basal tetnurans birds? And really what it comes down to is just evidence of feathers. That's what if it has feathers, it's a bird. Anatomically, it doesn't matter. It's a bird if it has feathers. It could be a Tyrannosaurus that has feathers. Doesn't matter, it's a bird.
So if we look at a group of what they would call theropod dinosaurs, these non-avian dinosaurs, there's a subgroup inside of there called Maniraptora. And if we look at all the fossils where we find real feathers, they're all found inside of this group. They're all found inside of Maniraptora. Now, we do find filaments outside of that group, but just filaments. We don't find feathers outside of that group. So let's jump into the 7 dramatic differences between dinosaurs and birds.
They list 7 different traits found in Archaeopteryx and in these other feathered dinosaurs that they say only exist in birds. And it's feathers, swivel wrists, a stabilized shoulder, the sideways facing shoulder joint, a short tail, walking at the knees, and hip structure. So they've really dug themselves into a hole by doing this, because there are certain animals that they have classified as birds, like Zooenalong and Microraptor, which have basically indistinguishable anatomical traits from other dinosaurs like Velociraptor and Deinonychus. And so if Archaeopteryx and Microraptor and Zooenalong, if these are just birds, well then by the same logic, if you follow this to its logical conclusion, then Velociraptors and Deinonychus are birds too. Because the degree of differences that separate animals like Deinonychus and Velociraptor from Archaeopteryx is so small that you can't justify calling it macroevolution, which is what they've been doing in the past. They've been saying that, dinosaurs can't evolve into birds because that's macroevolution. But if you list out all the anatomical features of Archaeopteryx and Microraptor, and then list out all the anatomical features of, say, Velociraptor or Deinonychus, there's really not much separating them at all. Nothing that would constitute macroevolution, right? So this ends up making it look even more like it's possible that, birds like Archaeopteryx and Microraptor, which they're calling birds, could just be dinosaurs. They could just be micro-evolved, cousins to Velociraptor and Deinonychus. So then, as we've been finding more and more feathered dinosaurs, they've basically been getting all of the features found in Archaeopteryx and relating it to these other dinosaurs and saying, well, if Archaeopteryx is a bird, then these other, dinosaurs with similar features to Archaeopteryx, they're also birds. And so they've looked at animals like Zooenalong, which is a relative of Velociraptor, and they've classified it as a bird because it has feathers, despite the fact that anatomically it's basically a Velociraptor. It's extremely similar to a Velociraptor. And they've always said that Velociraptor is a dinosaur. So the problem now, by saying animals like Zooenalong and other dromaeosaurs, by labeling them as birds, they're blurring the line between dinosaur and bird. Because Velociraptor has essentially the same anatomy as Zooenalong and very similar anatomy to Archaeopteryx. Not enough difference to really justify calling it macroevolution. So now what? Now what do they do? Because if you can't really explain the difference or justify the difference between calling Velociraptor a dinosaur and Zooenalong or Archaeopteryx or Microraptor calling them birds, what's going to happen? Aren't they just going to say, well, now Velociraptors are birds? And so we're going to see what happens. Over the years, they have always had Velociraptor labeled as a dinosaur. If you read some of their old articles, you see them mentioning Velociraptor as a dinosaur. And I'll put up some of those quotes, and they're not taken out of context. I'll put the links in the description so you can read it yourself. And in a lot of their old material, they have Velociraptor or Utahraptor in children's books or on posters. And again, they have them reconstructed as reptiles. They don't have feathers. They're walking like dinosaurs at the hip rather than at the knee like birds. They're dinosaurs, right? It calls them dinosaurs. And at the Creation Museum itself, they have an animatronic Utahraptor, and they have an animatronic model of a Velociraptor, right? In the Garden of Eden section of the Creation Museum, there's a Utahraptor there, and it's a dinosaur. It doesn't have feathers. It's walking like a dinosaur. It's called a dinosaur on the little display. And then in another section I think it's called Buddy's Dino Den or something, they have a Velociraptor there. Same thing. it's modeled as a reptile. There's no feathers on it, you know, and they have several articles where they sort of laugh at the idea that, you know, evolutionists are now illustrating and reconstructing velociraptors to look like birds, and they sort of scoff at this, right, and criticize it. And they also have an article about the quill knobs that were found on Velociraptor's arm and Dakota Raptor's arm. And again, they scoff at it and laugh at it and say that, you know, there's no way they can really tell based on this that, you know, it had feathers. And at the Ark Encounter exhibit, they have this wall with all of the, you know, created kinds that they think were on the Ark. And on the reptile section, they have dromaeosaurs listed in the reptile section. And each like kind that they have has a, you know, representative species that was on the Ark in order to like represent that kind of animal, right? And for dromaeosaurs, they have Velociraptor specifically. So they think that Velociraptor is a dinosaur. It's a reptile, right? So now where are we? They've now dug themselves into an inescapable hole because all these years they've been saying Utahraptor and Deinonychus and Velociraptor are dinosaurs, but have been saying that Microraptor and Archaeopteryx and Zoanodon and so many other dromaeosaurs and Maniraptorans are birds. So what have they done now? How have they responded? How have they fixed this? Just watch.
Today, but I've got one for you. All right. I want you to take the 7 criteria we talked about. All right, feathers, swivel wrist, the shoulder, the short tail, the knee walking, the hip structure, and we're going to evaluate an animal. And I want you guys to tell me whether you think it was a dinosaur or a bird. Okay? All right, here we go. Let's look at the wrist. Does this look like a dinosaur wrist that bends and grasps, or does it look like a swivel wrist that swivels sideways? What do you think? Swivel wrist. Good. Shoulder. Is that an angled shoulder, or is that just that continuous scapulocoracoid? It's the angled shoulder, right. Let's look at the hips. So Microraptor and Archaeopteryx, those are their hips. Our animal that we're looking at looks like bird hip. Let's look at the tail. Here's an actual photo. Around 26 tail vertebrae. Big muscle attachments? No. Looks very much like a bird. This animal that we're talking about, we haven't found feathers on it. But there's an animal in the same family, around the same size, that we did find feathers on. It's very similar. You can see giant wing feathers, big tail feathers. So that animal is called Genuine Long. It's a pretty big animal, about the size of a big turkey. And our animal is there at the bottom. All right, what do you think? Raise your hand if you think our animal was a dinosaur. Raise your hand if you think our animal was a bird. That animal is Velociraptor. I didn't call Velociraptor a bird, you just did. Don't tell anybody that I called Velociraptor a bird.
This was a prediction made by Joel Duff, and he said, this was about a year ago, I think, he said that, you know, they've been saying that Velociraptor is a dinosaur, and they've been downplaying the fact that it had feathers, but if they do find unambiguous feathers on Velociraptor, that they're going to switch, they're going to flip, and they're going to say that actually Velociraptor is a bird. And that's exactly what they've done.
Largely resembled other theropods, aside from the fact that they had feathers, right? They're even more dinosaur-like than the Velociraptors, which do have some bird-like characteristics. And honestly, once the denseness of Answers in Genesis wears off, although they've dug themselves in on some of these things pretty far, but when there becomes even more clear evidence that there's obvious feathers on Velociraptors, eventually what they're going to do is they're just going to call it a bird, right? They'll just flip and they'll call it a bird.
Congratulations, Joel Duff, on a job well done. You made that prediction. Credit where credit is due. And what's even more hilarious is the fact that the Creation Museum website has a illustration of Velociraptor that they credit Joel Leinenweber to. So, because remember, he's the paleo artist over Answers in Genesis. So all of their Velociraptor depictions, where it's depicted as a dinosaur without feathers, was made apparently by him. At least in this one, it's credited to him. And now in this video, he's saying Velociraptor is a bird, but is also claiming that there are clear differences that can distinguish birds from dinosaurs, and that, you know, one didn't evolve from the other, and that they're totally different, and you can easily tell the difference between them. Yet he himself has confused a dinosaur as a bird and vice versa. So which is it, Joel? Is Velociraptor a dinosaur or a bird? And which is it? Are dinosaurs and birds easily distinguishable from each other? Or is it easy to label one as the other?
Dinosaurs and birds are very different. Dinosaurs and birds are very different.
Busting myths and breaking chains, stepping out of preacher's reins. Darwin's truth now fuels my quest. Here I stand, no longer blessed.